Okay, it looks like you guys can see my screen now. We've got some exciting content for you guys today, and two really awesome presenters are going to be presenting with me. So who am I? My name is Pierce Orajema. I'm a senior developer evangelist here at Intuit. It's my job to help onboard you guys to get you listed on apps.com. Now, for the agenda today, I'm going to be covering some news and updates. Now, the news that I'm going to be covering is stuff that we've already announced, so I just want to preface with that. So if you heard this before, then that's great. I just want to make sure everyone's on the same page before we move forward. Our main topics for today's webinar is going to be harmony.intuit.com, and don't worry, if you don't know what that is, you'll find out soon, and also the Sandbox environment. Lastly, we'll end with a Q&A. So some housekeeping items. First things first is we are recording this, and we will be sharing it on our blog within a day or two after the webinar ends. It just takes me a little bit to get the recording uploaded, as well as the slides. We're going to be sharing the slides as well. The recording is going to be most important because we're going to be doing mainly demos and not as much slide content. Regarding questions, you can ask questions in the question panel at any time. We have people monitoring the question panel. We will be addressing them during the Q&A session. Now, we have a couple people monitoring the questions panel, so you'll also get questions while we're presenting as well. So feel free to ask questions at any time. And I believe chat should be enabled, so you guys can chat along if you would like to do that as well. So let's dive in. The first thing that I want you guys to know, if you don't know this already, is we have changed our name. We are no longer the Intuit Partner Platform. We are now Intuit Developer. I like the name a lot. Hopefully you guys like it as well. But if you're wondering why our communications say Intuit Developer instead of Intuit Partner Platform, this is the reason. We've changed our name. The next announcement, which is very relevant to you guys, is we have a new developer experience. The new developer.intuit.com is the best experience that I have seen for any developer portal that I have personally worked with. It allows you to make calls directly, really quickly. The goal is to make the onboarding process and code execution process for you guys as simple and fast as possible. And this new version of the website just makes it so much easier and so much better with all of the documentation improvements, more sample code, more tools to make the onboarding process, testing process, and improvement process of your applications just the best experience you've ever come across. The next thing that I wanted to mention is, this will be interesting for those of you who don't know what apps.com is. Well, we have a new version. The new version is designed, of course, to increase conversions and drive new users to your applications. We've improved the design, it's a unified store, and one of the new announcements that came out was the global reach. So it's now a global ready apps.com. So if you are marketing your application in any of our key global markets, Australia, Canada, UK, India, then you can specifically have your app listed in those countries as well. The last and one of the coolest announcements is we're now opening up a new payments API. Now, one of my favorite things about payments APIs, or one of the key things, is there's a lot of payments APIs out there. You guys know this, right? There's a lot of payments APIs. So why are we announcing a new one? What's the strategic approach? Well, think about it this way. If you are using, or if an end user is using a payments API, that essentially means that they are a small business. And if they're a small business, they need to manage their accounting. And so it's a key strategic difference that our payments API provides for you guys who are implementing these things. The key strategic difference is we can now enable reconciliation, the ability to have all of the payments be reconciled into their accounting, literally saving hours of time a month and keeping data extremely accurate. And this is something that other payments APIs essentially can't do or struggle to do and cannot do it as well as we do. So if you're interested or looking for a new payments API, ours is top tier payments API, and as well as we have one of the lowest rates for payments API, if not the lowest, so the per transaction rates. So that's pretty awesome there as well. So now we're going to move on into our first main topic, harmony.intuit.com. Now let me introduce Darrell Rabinowitz.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. I'm the design strategist for the Harmony Design System, and I help teams across Intuit's small business group design for the QBO ecosystem. And if any of you are curious as to what a design system is, just think about Apple's human interface guidelines. When you go to any Apple product or site, it all looks and feels and behaves like a family. And that's what we've really tried to do with the QuickBooks ecosystem. So let me take you into our Harmony Toolkit. I'll give you folks a brief intro, and then we'll take a little deep dive into how you might start designing your app to work within the system. So this toolkit, as we've said, is available at harmony.intuit.com. Everyone can go to it and see it. It basically has guidance for making product design decisions. It has design principles, visual styles, patterns, and Photoshop downloads for the web, for iOS and Android. And depending on what stage of design you're at, different parts of the toolkit may be more relevant. So for example, if we go into the design principles section, these will help you make a design decision. So establish a familiar resemblance means from one part of your app to the next part of the app, you want it to be kind of the same. These design principles really just help us create this cohesive experience. But we also have pieces like our visual framework, where you can see our color palette, or, for example, our typography system. And I know it's small on the screen, but you can see the fonts that we use and the sizes and when to use it, etc. And then we have patterns, which are typified by, say, everyone knows what a global header is. A pattern kind of describes when to use something, how it looks, and when to use it. But I think it'll be a lot easier for you guys to understand the value of the design toolkit if we take an actual design problem and see how using the toolkit could help you. So think about this. In QuickBooks, we needed a way to see all of our customers and easily look from customer to customer. And we also wanted to be able to quickly create a transaction for each customer. And so if you dive into that, you need to think about, how do we see all of our customers? How do we see their details? How do I take action on that customer, like create a new one or do something for that customer? That's a real lot to think about when you're designing your app. So I start by thinking about the content that's going on the screen and the kind of screen itself. And I'm going to talk about both of those. But first I'm going to start with the kind of screen the content might go on. And for that, I'll go to the layout section of the toolkit. And here you can see again, we highlight our design principles because it just really helps us focus on the right design decisions. So we talk about all the different pieces that are part of the structure of the QuickBooks ecosystem and why they're important. And I'm scrolling because now I can look at the different types of layout examples that we have. And so right off the bat, you can see that there's a default layout. I call it default layout with a stage. And if I hit that link, it describes, this is our default layout, and it says when to use this page site. So use it when, for all top-level landing pages and when you might have some insights to show. And if I think back to our problem about showing all of my customers, well, I might want to see which customer has an overdue invoice or which customer has paid me. And this page type might actually work for that. But I don't know. Let me see what else is available. Oops. Sorry, I went back one too much. So now down we have the split view, or it says split view with a stage. If I click on that, I can see I use the split view when I have a list of items and when each item has a lot of detail. If I'm scrolling down, I can kind of see an example of what it looks like. And I can see that it looks like this might be also right for my customers, right? So what did we end up doing in QuickBooks? Well, I'm going to take you there. We can see. So if I go to Customers in QuickBooks, this is a default layout page. It has the stage area at the top, like we just talked about, where I can see insights. I can actually see that I have 10 overdue invoices, customers with 10 overdue invoices, and I can see my customer list. Well, what happens if I want to see more details on that customer? So I'll hit this customer, and now I'm actually at a split view page like we talked to before, and I can go in between customer and see all of their transactions. So you can see how the toolkit kind of guided us into how we made these product decisions. But what happens if I want to create a task for, what if I wanted to create an invoice for this customer, Durelvis? Well, you can see I've got some buttons up here. So how would I know which of these buttons to use? And how would I know that this is a table that I want to use? Back in my toolkit, I can actually search for patterns. It works pretty well. I can see tables. So in this pattern, it describes the different modes that we have for tables, and there's a lot of detail around what constitutes a table, how a table should work, how a table should behave, what's the default mode, how to filter, how to take actions. There's a lot of details around how things would work so that when the user goes from page to page, screen to screen, and even device to device, they can understand that they don't have to learn a new interaction on every page. So back at our customer list, you can see we have a table and all the rules around how this table works, from the filtering here to the hover state, are all described in the table's pattern. So let's say I know I'm going to take an action, right? That we said that was part of our main problem. So, well, what buttons would I use? In the buttons pattern, there's actually a diagram that shows all of our different kinds of buttons, when one would be a primary version, a secondary version, and which type to use in which situation. It describes when to use a primary button, that there's a menu button and a combo button, and I know there's a lot to read, but we also have very distinct use cases for each type. There's visual design guidelines for each type of button. And there's even stuff around the hierarchy and the placement of the button, so that we know if there's one button, we always put it in the center. If there's two buttons, we put our main button on the right, etc. This will help us make decisions. So back to our page that we said before, well, I can see right now that I've got a primary menu button, because when I tap on it, I've got a menu, and a secondary button. So if I click on Create an Invoice, you'll notice that a whole new page type comes down. This is what we call a trouser. And if I go back to my patterns, my layout pattern, I can see that trousers are designed to be used when we're creating, editing, or viewing a transaction and when there's a complex form. And the reason that we've designed what we call the trouser, it's shorthand for transaction browser. The reason that we've described it this way is because typically our users need to be isolated when they're creating these complex transactions and they don't want a lot of distraction. So the trouser kind of keeps you, it lets you perform your task, like we might just create this invoice, which I'll do right now for us really quickly. And do you think I should pay myself $100 an hour? I think so. And if I save and send it, I can send myself an invoice, etc. And the great thing about the trouser is that when it's done, when you're done creating that transaction, you're back where you started. You don't leave your contexts. It's really helpful for people so that I was at this customer Durelvis and I'm still at this customer Durelvis. And the toolkit, the pattern, would help me make that decision as to how that trouser should work, what goes in the header, and how it actually behaves, how the trousers browse back and forth. So back to our design problem. We know we want to use a default layout on one page, and we want to go to a split view layout on other pages. The containers we would use would be tables, we would use buttons, and when we make a transaction, that would go to a trouser. It sounds complicated, but everything is laid out in the toolkit. But if I was really making an app, I might have to figure out, well, is that really going to work? I might want to actually mock it up and prototype it. Well, in our Downloads and Tools section, this is a big load, but you can see we have web downloads, iOS downloads, and Android downloads. These are where all the elements we just talked about, we have layered Photoshop files, and you can grab all of the elements so that you could make your own mocks and make your own prototypes. For example, this is just a ping of the PSD file, and here's a mock of the trouser. So if you not only wanted to use this container for the trouser, but also our form design and the header, all you have to do is go to the downloads and pick up the PSD files. And these PSD files actually contain all sorts of visual information. Here's a PSD file of all of our different tables. So you're not starting from scratch. There's elements for you to just pick up and use and to create your apps so that they're very, very integrated into the QBO ecosystem. So using the toolkit can really help you create an app that not only solves your user goals, but works cohesively in the QBO ecosystem. And because the toolkit is actually a living document that evolves as we add more and more use cases and more folks into the ecosystem, let us know how you're using it and how it's working for you. That's all I got.
Great. I'm going to kind of throw a little bit of a curveball here at Durell. And now that everyone has seen what harmony.intuit.com is, many of them might not have known before, and now that they know, what is your recommended approach? Like, where do they use this? What situations will they start using this? And keep in mind that we've got some large companies out there with development teams, in 10, 20, 30 or more people, and we've got some developers out there that are 1, 2, maybe 3-person shop sort of thing. So how do you recommend they use this, and at what point should they start engaging? Like, what's the situation?
Well, I think every person, every company, whether you're a big company or a small company, should start by considering your users and follow a user-centered design process. You might actually have design principles of your own that you follow. And I would start by looking at our principles. It's under Harmony.101. I would start by looking at our design principles and your principles and see where there are where there's matching and agreements. As a designer, I actually sketch and draw things out, and I would look right away at our visual framework. This is where we have our very tactical layout visual things like color and illustration, just to help us sketch to make sure that we're keeping within the system. So that's the starting point. And if you're a developer and you don't have a designer, actually I think the toolkit is a great resource for you, because you don't have to make a decision on what color to use for an element, because we've got it right here. All the colors that you want to use with their hex codes. We have all the fonts that you might want to use are all laid out for us, so you can figure out right off the bat, even if your app doesn't behave like a QuickBooks app, you can apply our look and feel to your existing app. So that's sometimes a really good place for folks to start, especially if they don't have a design team. As you go forward, that's where I would really dig into some of the more complex patterns, like our different layout choices and how to create a form, what to do about communication and error states. And some of the patterns in the toolkit actually go from very high level, like we talked about layouts, down to a component. So an error message, a button, a select drop down, etc. So you can kind of see how all the pieces work together.
Awesome. Thank you for answering that. And thank you for coming in and presenting for us today. So now we're going to move on to our next topic, which is going to be the sandbox environment. And we have who better to present the sandbox environment than the guy who designed it. So let's give a little welcome here to Vishal.
Hello everyone. Thank you, Piers, for the introduction. I'm Vishal Agarwal, and I'm a product manager. And one of the key things that we released at QuickBooks Connect was the sandbox environment. We received very, very great reviews about our sandbox environment, and I'll just go over the whole sandbox flow and how you as developers can start working with the sandbox environment. So the first thing is, what is sandbox? The question that some folks have asked me is, what is sandbox? And consider a sandbox as a play area for developers. It's an environment designed just for debugging, testing. As you're developing your app, you can use this environment to play around with the environment without touching any production data or any production environment. And at the same time, you can perform all the operations that you want, that you would usually perform on a production environment. So it's basically a play area for the developers to get you started. What are the key attributes of a sandbox? It's the sandbox that we release is an exact replica of our production environment. So what you can do on production environment, you can do it on our sandbox environment. Definitely there are some things that are disabled, but those things were disabled because they did not apply to a sandbox environment. It provides you with an out-of-box experience. It gives you a zero setup mode. So if I consider, if you look at what you had to do before we provided a sandbox environment. Say you are a new developer, you come to our portal and you want to start developing your app. How do you go about doing that before we provided you with a sandbox environment? You would go to QuickBooks, you would create a trial company, with some fake email address, and then try working with that company, and try to get it extended or reach to our support team and wait on them to get back to you with a sample company so that you can start developing your environment. And what did we just do with the sandbox that we released? You don't have to do any of that. As soon as you sign up on our portal, we automatically provision a sandbox environment for you. So let me go back to, let me start off with our portal flow. How does our portal flow look like? So this is our portal, and let me go ahead and sign in with my username and password. So if now, definitely I have signed in as an existing user. However, if I signed up as a new user, a sandbox would be automatically provisioned for you. In addition to, if you were coming to our new portal for the first time and you use the credentials from your old portal, we will provision a new sandbox environment for you as well. So if we go back, and if I go under my name and I go over your sandbox, basically what you see is, that you have a sandbox company that is provisioned for you. We provision both QuickBooks accounting and payment sandbox for you. So, as Pia said, we released a new payments API. You want to develop on that new payments API, you can use the same sandbox environment. Both of them are automatically provisioned for you. You have to do absolutely nothing. Now, if I click on the launch button, if you noticed, it took me to sandbox.qbo.intuit.com. And basically, this is your sandbox QuickBooks company that was provisioned for you. It says my name, Vishal Agarwal Sandbox Company. This is a sandbox environment. So, you don't have to go to qbo.intuit.com anymore if you want to start developing your app. Basically, a QBO company was provisioned for you automatically. In addition to that, what we do is, if you notice, there is already some sample data that we provision as a part of this sandbox creation. The data that is contained within the sandbox environment is basically, we give you 141 transactions, 31 customers, 26 vendors, 4 employees, 20 items. So it's basically a very, very generic data of the industry type, construction trade, that you can start working with right now, basically. So no work required for you, out of the box experience. You can get started now. Now, another thing I want to mention is, if you noticed, I was just automatically logged into the sandbox environment. Now, if you go to sandbox.qbo.intuit.com directly and you want to log into your sandbox environment, you can use the same credentials, basically the exact same credentials that you use to log into your developer portal. Into the developer portal, you use the exact same credentials for the sandbox environment. No need for a new sign up, nothing. It's the same credentials. It's all seamless. So it's basically a one click, and you get, everything is done for you. Now I want to talk about some use cases of how you can use the sandbox environment, right? So I like to start off with the sample app. So at QuickBooks Connect, we released a couple of sample apps, time tracking and e-commerce. Let's start with the time tracking one. You can actually test drive the code literally from the portal. So this is our new transaction tool. If you noticed, it's talking to my sandbox company that I just showed you, and basically, let's try to add an employee. So let me change the name of the employee, and let me try to run the code. So now what is happening is, it's actually running the code against the sandbox company. So if you look at the response object, it says the employee that was created. And at the same time, if I click on this button, see in QuickBooks, right, it will take me to the employees page, and this is the employee that was just created. So as you saw, it's basically making a call to your sandbox company, and it's all live on our portal. You can make this happen directly from the portal. There are some additional steps in here for the time tracking that you can go through on your own. But what I want to spend some time again is on the actual code, basically. So for the time tracking app, you can actually go and download the whole code from GitHub, and this is all there, and you can get the code onto your machine, and it's all configured to run with your sandbox company. So let me show you how this code will run and how it will look like. So, I have the code set up on my machine. I have imported all of it. One another thing you will have to do is you'll need an app created. So I have created an app called time tracking app. If you look at the keys, basically you'll need to copy paste the keys from here for this app into the code. So if I go over here and I look at OAuth.json, basically, I have my app token, consumer key, consumer secret all set up over here, which is exactly matching to my app that was there. Now, if I go ahead and run this code, so we'll just go ahead and run this code. It will just do some setup, and as soon as we see ready over here, now I can go to this URL, and basically the first thing I do is connect my app to QuickBooks. So again, when you do the connect to QuickBooks button, the first thing you would do is let me sign out from here and let me go through the sign in process. So again, what I'm using here is my same credentials as my developer portal account, which was used to log into my Sandbox company. So I'm using the same credentials. And the time tracking app that I have on my portal setup, I'm authorizing the app to make calls to that company. So now, this app is now provisioned to talk to that company, Sandbox company. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to push employees, Brian Ruff and Paul Simmons, into QuickBooks from this app into QuickBooks. So as soon as I hit sync, it will push those over there, and it will tell me the QBO IDs. And if I click on view in QuickBooks, it's again going to my Sandbox QuickBooks company, and these are the Brian Ruff and Paul Simmons are the two employees that we just pushed pushed into the QuickBooks company. Going back, I'm now pushing customers. And the customer names are Alvin Lee, Brad Hall. The QBO IDs are 69 and 70. Again, when I go and look them in QuickBooks, Alvin Lee is right here, Brad Hall is right here. We just push those customers into QuickBooks. The last one, service items. So this will basically push in research and deposition with a rate of $50 an hour and $100 an hour into QuickBooks. Again, when I go into and look into it, I see deposition over here, and I should see research as well in here. So, basically the sample app, we just pushed all of our initial data set into QuickBooks. The next step would be, let's do a time entry. Let me select an employee. The date would be, yesterday. Let me select a customer. Brian did some research for Alvin at $50 an hour, and he spent, say, 2 hours on it, research work, and hit save. So what it just did is it pushed the time activity into QBO with a QBO ID of 8. And you can see that this time activity was now pushed. Now, let's go ahead and create an invoice for this time activity. So total pending invoice is 1. If I click on it, I can go ahead and hit generate. So now this is generating an invoice in QuickBooks. Let's go and see this generated invoice in QuickBooks. So, this was the invoice that I just generated, research, 2 hours at a rate of $50, and this is the invoice that just got pushed. So, as you saw, we just went through a whole time activity sample app that is talking to our Sandbox environment, and it's really like very, very seamless for you to work with this. If I go back to the code, one of the things that you will have to do is, when you're talking to the QuickBooks Sandbox, you'll have to use this URL, which is sandbox-quickbooks.api.intuit.com. So, it's not quickbooks.api.intuit.com, but sandbox-quickbooks.api.intuit.com if you want to make calls to the API on the Sandbox environment. for payments API, it would be api.sandbox.api.intuit.com. So, basically the time tracking sample app, we just went through the whole flow. We just synced some items and customers and employees. We created a time activity, and finally we created an invoice for that time activity. One other thing I want to point out is, if you look at the sample code, there is this file QBO gateway under main Java. Basically, this is the file where most of the magic happens, where, you create the employee in QBO, you create customer in QBO, and we are using the Java SDK to make all of those calls. So, as we saw, the sandbox enables quick onboarding and easy debugging and testing. I want to point out some things about the sandbox environment. If you go into the audit log of the sandbox, you might see that the username is Craig Carlson. Some of the old users of the sandbox might see the user as Craig Carlson, but we have fixed this, and it should now, moving forward, for new users, say as that user's name in there. Another thing is, today our sandbox environment is specifically only for US companies only, and currently the roadmap that we have set up is we are working towards global companies and providing Australia, UK, Canada, etc. companies on the sandbox environment, where you will be able to create sandbox companies for those regions to test your app. In addition, we are also planning to provide you with multiple data sets that you can work with, as your test data. So, to wrap it up, basically, Sandbox, it's one of the most important tools, and we are trying to make your life, the developer's life, as easy as possible, and provide all the tools that we can provide to get you onboarded, started, and get your app going in no time, basically.
Awesome. This is great. I don't know if many of you have used the Sandbox yet, but I have used it several times, and it has just saved me so much. Like in the past, I was always creating, even though I work at Intuit, I was always creating QBO free trials just to run tests against, and I always had to enter in customers or something like that just to run tests and pull data. And this has saved me a bunch of time with what I do. And I can only imagine that it's going to save you guys the same amount of time as well.